Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs, where today we're in 2 Kings chapter 5. We're in the first half of that chapter. I may or may not next week preach the second half of that chapter. Haven't figured that out yet. We'll see as we go. This is the story of Naaman, if you're familiar with that. This is the story of the Syrian general turned leper, turned healed, but how on earth did he do it? And that's kind of the question. The overarching question is, what do you do when you have a problem that you can't solve? That's the fundamental kind of conceit of the story. Is Naaman is, as we'll discuss later on, he's a very powerful man, and yet he runs into an issue that he can't do anything about, and his doctors can't do anything about it. None of the people in his land have a solution for it, and he is forced to seek God for a remedy for the problem. It does end up working out, so good for him, but it teaches him a little something about humility and the actual God along the way. In the same way, we as human beings, we have a problem that we can't fix. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, we are told. And so we need a solution, and we all kind of feel that something's wrong. We all feel that we need some kind of answer, and yet we can't restore God's glory ourselves. We can't live up to what we should be ourselves. We can't fix the problem, so we have to go somewhere else to find the solution. How can God's glory be restored? From where can that come from? It can't come from you, but it can come from the God who made you. If you open your mind to God's ability, well, a lot of other things will fall into place. Anything can happen with God. And so consider the story of the man named Naaman. I'll read 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 14 here. You have probably heard this before, especially if you're religious, but even if you're not, you may well have stumbled across the story. It's fairly popular. Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man in the view of his master, and eminent, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was also a valiant warrior, but afflicted with leprosy. Now the Arameans had gone out in bands, and had taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel. And she waited on Naaman's wife, and she said to her mistress, "If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, then he would cure him of his leprosy." And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, "The girl who is from the land of Israel spoke such and such." Then the king of Aram said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he departed, and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothes. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which said, "And now, as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman my servant to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy." But when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and keep alive, and that this man is sending word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? But consider now and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me." Verse 8. Now it happened, when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent word to the king, saying, "Why did you tear your clothes? Just have him come to me, and he shall learn that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with all his horses and his chariots, and stood at the doorway of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean." But Naaman was furious, and went away, and said, "Behold, I thought, he will certainly come out to me, and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the sight, and cure the leprosy. Are Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, not better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them, and be clean?" So he turned and went away in a rage. Then his servants approached and said to him, saying, "My father, had the prophet told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more than when he says to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, in accordance with the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Again, that's probably a familiar story. You've at least heard the story beats before. Naaman, this highly decorated and very impressive individual, has a skin disease, leprosy issue, and ultimately God is the solution for it. But it takes a few different forms, and what you have to think about as you go through this story, how I've categorized it in its like 3 different arcs, 3 different points, are The point of the story is how impossible everything really is. We then have to think about, firstly, the impossible situation he's put in, then we have to think about the impossible man he comes up against, and then the impossible solution or answer that God provides. But we'll start with just the first one. The impossible situation. A lot of times we don't really appreciate this or appreciate how far this goes, but Naaman really has it tough here. He is a very impressive individual. He is a general, a war captain from Syria or Aram. Some versions say Aram. To my understanding, those are the same country. I'm not really sure why they're called differently, presumably different names in different cultures, but that's a guess on my part. I don't actually know. A war general from Syria, the land slightly to the north of the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel and Judah, respectively. They are a nation who has been a thorn in Israel's side for a really long time, and they continue to be so. You see, even in this story in verse 2, the Arameans or the Syrians had come down in bands to raid Israel and then take some of the people away captive, including this little girl. This is the situation they're in. It's a strong nation, pretty much. It's a decent nation. He is well known among the nation. He's a great man in the view of his master. He is eminent. God has given him victories. He's got accolades. He is basically the best in his field. He's this valiant warrior. All these great titles attributed to him in verse 1. Great enough that the king of Syria, when Naaman asks for help from the king of Syria, Syria says, yeah, absolutely. Go and get yourself healed. I want you healed. Naaman is doing a lot to stand out as an individual, and yet, as much as that's the case, he's also got this leprosy thing. In the end of verse 1, he's afflicted with leprosy. Leprosy is a general term for skin disease, to what I understand, and so it could be something like a small patch of eczema where you just, don't grow hair in a normal way on one part of your arm, or it could be the kind of thing that gets into your bones and rots you and puts holes in your flesh even while you're still alive, skin-devouring parasites and stuff like that. If I had to guess, it's more the latter that I expect Naaman had when it says leprosy, even though that term can be used generally. I think it's more of a significant, severe condition. If it's just one little hairless patch, like nobody actually cares, right? That's not significant as a problem, whereas if it's actually, eating into you, that's a serious issue. Naaman is this unstoppable force when it comes to Syria, but then the unstoppable force hits the immovable object and finds out he's not quite so unstoppable as he thinks he is. He has some skin disease, some debilitating illness that is taking over. It's not that any human being is getting the jump on him and killing him. No, he's too good for that. But disease gets us all in the end, no matter how competent we are. And Naaman, now who's in the prime of life, is stuck dealing with something that is going to destroy him at a premature age, as we might think. So what exactly can he do? It's not like you can medicate, in those days they didn't have medicines for this kind of flesh-eating bacteria stuff. They didn't have all of the modern ability to heal those things and throw and get rid of the nasty stuff. They were rather limited in that. Leprosy was one of those things where God says in the Old Testament, if you have leprosy, you're just kicked out of the city. And if at some point the leprosy goes away, then there is an allowance for you to be allowed back in, but most of the time you wouldn't be. And so leper camps were developed to live outside the cities because they just didn't want to, God didn't want the disease to spread inside of normal cities with normal people. Leprosy is just a killer. So what can Naaman do? He is a dead man walking. He is a great man, and yet he has been reduced to nothing. So far down the scale, so far down the ladder, that you see him, he's desperate. He is willing to consider anything for a solution because he knows this is an impossible situation. There is no solution. And so he's looking around trying to find something, and he looks in the most unlikely of places. There is a slave girl. She's a captive from Israel. She volunteers this prophet who's from Samaria. If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, in verse 3, then he would cure him of his leprosy. She says these things. A lot of times we focus on her because it's impressive that she would speak up. It's impressive that she, a little Israelite girl, would volunteer help to the enemy. Again, Naaman is a successful military man in Syria, and Syria is causing a lot of problems for Israel. Why would she help out the enemy and try to get him healed? That doesn't really make sense. So it's good for her to have her innate goodness overrides maybe the natural inclination to hurt your enemies or refuse to give medical aid to those who you don't like very much or who you may judge to not deserve it. So a lot of times we focus on her and how great she is, and that's cool. But think about Naaman. This is a slave, not a master. This is a slave from a foreign land, a land of your enemies. This is an Israelite, not a Syrian. This is a child, not an adult. This is a girl, not even a boy. This is, I mean, from every perspective, this is like the least important person you could possibly listen to. And Naaman listens anyway. And Naaman appeals this to the king of Syria, and the king of Syria says, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. The little girl who's been a slave, who's captured from the land of the enemy, has now become so important that the king of Syria is listening to her. Does that not just speak to you about how terrible and desperate the situation is? That Naaman is doing these things, and he's doing his best to find a solution anywhere a solution may be found. You can see that Naaman is desperate. You can see that the king cares for Naaman, and as such is desperate. And he sends Naaman over with a bunch of money. In verse 5, 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothes, and he goes to the king of Israel and asks for healing. And the king of Israel is also desperate because he has no idea what to do. He knows this is an impossible situation as well. Naaman knows it's impossible, so he's willing to grasp at any solution. The king of Syria knows it's impossible, so he's willing to grasp at any solution. The king of Israel knows it's impossible, so he's willing to, he's protesting that he can't actually help. Why are you sending him to me? This isn't how this should work. Why are you sending him to me? There's no possible way I can provide a solution for this. He actually thinks in verse 7 that Syria is looking for a fight with him. Who am I? Am I God that I can fix this guy? Like, look, he's just looking for an occasion against me or a quarrel against me. He wants a fight. He knows that leprosy can't be healed. He knows that he definitely can't do it. Even if leprosy can be healed by God or whomever, he's not God and he has no connection with God. How could he possibly provide a solution for this? Naaman is an incredibly impressive man, and yet, by seeming random chance, he is brought low. Everyone is desperate to get him healed. Even the king of Israel wants to get him healed because he doesn't want to deal with the consequences of not being able to heal him. And yet, everyone knows it's impossible, and there is no possible way that he could ever be healed. What would you do to try and answer an impossible question? If you had a disease that couldn't be healed, what would you do to try and find an answer? If you can think about that physically, if there's some kind of medical issue that you have or that you could hypothetically have, or you can think about that spiritually. The sin disease, there's nothing you can do to fix it. What would you do to heal yourself from something that is impossible to be healed from? Naaman, even an impressive man, Naaman, is brought down to his knees and forced to look towards God. And that's when he sees him. Well, he sees something, that is. That's when he sees the man, and this is an impossible man. The reason I phrased it this way is because it's a clever, it's a clever thing that means two different things, actually. An impossible man means there's no way this could possibly work. It also means someone who's very difficult to work with. And Elisha happens to fulfill both. Now, Elisha is the second prophet. There was Elijah was the first one. He's the main one a lot of people think about. Elisha is the second one, and in many ways, Elisha is greater than Elijah. Actually, in 2 Kings 5, this is taking place, if you go back a little bit, 2 Kings 3, Elisha provides a miracle to save the nation of Israel when they go to war. In chapter 4, Elisha provides for the widow who's running out of money, and he provides her oil. In chapter 4, again, there's a woman who can't have a son, and so Elisha provides a son. He prays for her, and God allows her to have a son, that is. When her son dies, also in chapter 4, he raises him from the dead. There's a poison stew that he fixes. Chapter 5, he heals Naaman. Chapter 6, somebody loses an axe head, and he fixes it. In chapter 6, the city is overrun with the, I believe it's the Syrians in that case, or the Arameans, again, who are attacking to capture Elisha, and Elisha just says no, and the army of God takes them captive instead. Over and over again, what you have in this section is a larger discourse on what Elisha is doing and all the miracles that Elisha is doing. Naaman is just one facet of the miracle, of the miracles that Elisha can perform with the help of God. And so, it's no surprise that he is here, that he can provide an answer. But it's definitely not the answer Naaman was seeking, and in many ways, Elisha provides another set of problems. He brings those with him. Elisha is, in many ways, he's about as offensive as you can be. And I have a couple of thoughts, or a couple examples of that. You start with this in verse 8. Elisha, the man of God, hears that the king of Israel is in distress. He's torn his clothes and all sorts of other stuff. Elisha sends word to the king of Israel and says, hey, stop wasting time here. Stop being so dramatic, right? Drama queen. Just send him over to me. Verses 8 and 9. That's kind of curious, isn't it? Elisha, the man of God, summons Naaman to come to his house. Now, Naaman is a general. Naaman is a very impressive man, right? Naaman has also traveled all the way from Syria down to Samaria. And then Elisha has the gall to summon Naaman like he is just a common human being, which is slightly insulting. But also, if Naaman's already traveled, however many 100 miles to come and see, to come into your general area, can you not travel the half a mile it takes to go and see him too? Apparently not. No, Elisha actually just commands Naaman to come and see him. Why would Elisha not walk over to see him? Yeah, I know that Naaman is the one who's needing the help, and so that he's the one who naturally would want to make the sacrifices, or would need to make the sacrifices to find the solution. I understand that, but also, it would seem to be nice for Elisha to just walk the last little bit of the distance. Since Naaman's come 98% of the way, why does he also have to come the last 2% of the way? Why can't Elisha just step out and help him? Second thing that you see in Elisha is he stays inside. He doesn't even step outside to go and see Naaman. Naaman pulls up at his door in verse 9, and Elisha in verse 10, he sends a messenger to Naaman. Elisha can't even open the door and look at Naaman and say the message to his face. Actually, Elisha stays in the house and sends somebody else out with the message. Naaman doesn't get to see Elisha, at least not yet. In the second half of the chapter, he will, but not yet. Elisha is inside, and basically Naaman, who's traveled all the way to Samaria, now travels all the way to Elisha's house, wherever that is. And now that Elisha is in there, he's expecting Elisha to come out and say hello to him, and Elisha actually just says, go away and wash up. Right? I'm not going to see you. I'm not going to meet you. I'm not going to do these things for you. No, go wash on the Jordan River. What in the world? I mean, that's not very nice. Can you imagine being someone who has some great title, right? Imagine like CEO of a company, right? You're a very impressive human being from these worldly standards, and then you find yourself ordered around by a nobody who, when you come into his general vicinity, he won't even give you the time of day. He won't even look at you. He just sends other people to go out and deal with you. I mean, this is if Elisha were a doctor, we would say that this is horrible bedside manner. As such, it is just it's a lack of dignity that he has, and he doesn't dignify Naaman with the slightest. He just kind of says, "Oh well, go away and do your own thing, right? Go wash in the river. Maybe I'll see you later." That seems kind of rude. And Elisha makes Naaman do the work. As part of that, verses 10, 11, and 12, Naaman is suffering a disease. The least Elisha could do is come out and fix it and heal him. Naaman has traveled far. The least Elisha could do is, try to help alleviate some of the burden. Naaman is among enemies. The least Elisha could do is be a little bit friendly, but instead, the answer to Naaman's problem is to wash on a river, which is something that Naaman has to do, it's another place Naaman has to travel to. It's another thing Naaman has to accomplish. It's another activity for him to work on. And, by the way, he has nicer and cleaner rivers at home. I don't know if that's actually true or not, or if he's just kind of being angry and racist, but either way, he is insulted by having to dip in the Jordan River. Understandably so. I mean, when you look at Elisha, what you see is Naaman has been promised healing. He comes to Elisha, and what he sees is a man who acts incredibly aloof. And that does not seem great, especially not for a prophet of God. You think the prophets of God, God goes to a lot of effort to make many of the prophets fairly relatable, living in bad situations or in bad times, or the way they express themselves is very familiar to how many of us feel about, especially the world we live in today. Many of the prophets are incredibly relatable. Elisha, one of the reasons I personally don't like Elisha very much is because he's not. He's very aloof. He's very much like this. This is not a surprise for Naaman's story. This is kind of the expected. This is his MO. Is Elisha is a bit above all these things, and he just kind of keeps himself above all of the problems that are happening below. I'm sure he helps out, but he also has this degree of separation that I don't much like. At the same time, Elisha's doing something very particular, and it takes on a great meaning when you come to the New Testament especially, because as much as John the Baptist is a figure that is modeled after Elijah, Jesus is the figure who's modeled after Elisha, or rather, should I say, Elisha is a forerunner for Jesus, a foreshadow of him. And it really helps that Elisha spends a lot of his time acting like God. Think about it. It's kind of rude for Elisha, the man, to summon Naaman to his doorstep. At the same time, it's kind of expected that God is greater than you. God is not supposed to go out to you. The fact that he did is a mercy and a blessing. That's not something we deserve. God is not supposed to go out to you. No, God is supposed to, or you're supposed to go to God. You're supposed to put in the effort. So it makes sense why Elisha doesn't go out his door to go and meet Naaman along the road in Samaria. It makes sense why Naaman is summoned to him, because Elisha is acting like God. God is holy. There's a reason Elisha stays inside. It's not that Elisha doesn't want to see Naaman face to face, but it is God is holy, and the unholy are always barred from his presence. That's true in the temple. That's why nobody can go into the most holy place. It's true, and why no normal person can go into the holy place itself. It's true in the throne room of God. No unholy person is going to be allowed in his presence. That's kind of why Judgment Day exists and why there's a condemnation to hell. God is holy. There is a degree of separation, and so it makes sense why Elisha would stay inside, away from Naaman. Naaman has the door shut between him and Elisha. And by the way, after Naaman dips in the river and purifies himself, when he then comes to Elisha, it seems that Elisha is out there speaking to him, which means that the barrier is removed after Naaman is cleansed. Interesting. It's almost like Elisha is representing God. It seems kind of weird that Elisha makes Naaman do all the work, go to the Jordan and dip in the Jordan River and stuff like that. But the fact is, God also makes us do work. God provides the solution, the sinlessness. He provides the sacrifice, but we have to go and take it. We have to obey in order to access it. We have to do something in return. In reality, Naaman doing the work of dipping in the river isn't going to do anything by itself. It's just taking a bath. It's not going to fix your leprosy. It's not like leprosy comes off with the application of water, but it is the work of God will be accomplished when you step into the water and do what he told you to do. By the way, that's a really good baptism parallel. All right, we're leaving it there, but you understand. Naaman comes to Elisha thinking that Elisha can heal him. Naaman comes to Elisha not understanding who God is. But I think after this experience, and after the kind of upfront rudeness that Elisha has towards Naaman, And then after Naaman obeys, how everything is just nice after that, and he actually gets to meet Elisha and all sorts of stuff like that. I think after this experience, since Elisha lived in this way, Naaman will now understand who God is. Naaman is coming to a man to get the healing from a man. I thought the prophet of God would come out to me, and he would call on the name of the Lord his God, but he would come out to me, and he would wave his hand, and he would cure the leprosy. That's what I thought would happen. But what actually happens is God's doing the curing, and God doesn't want Naaman to be confused about who the actual healer is. Elisha, he acts in a very rude way, seemingly, but it's actually a very helpful way to help Naaman understand exactly where he's at. I don't think Elisha's being prideful here. I don't think that he's just kind of being a jerk because he can be a jerk. And it must be said, this is not the operative way God has all of us function in. But for someone who is like Naaman, who is confused, who doesn't know what he should be doing, it does make sense that, hey, Elisha, what exactly am I supposed to... When he's coming to ask Elisha, like, what am I supposed to do? It makes sense that Elisha would build a degree of separation and use this as an opportunity to teach Naaman about a God he doesn't understand. If you're just a jerk to people on the street, that's not communicating the same thing. But I don't think that's what Elisha's doing, so just kind of keep that in the back of your minds. Yeah, be nice to people. Sometimes you gotta be a little bit rude to them and remind them who God is, and that they should pay attention to God and all sorts of things like that. But there's no call to just be rude for no reason. Elisha is being rude for a reason, and I think it's an important reason. And so Naaman is understandably angry with this, and this is where he walks away. He storms away, and he seriously considers not doing it. And it seems like he's not actually going to do it until his servants step in, and they help provide him with the impossible answer. Dip in the water it's a wild statement to try and heal leprosy. There's no possible way that can work. Again, it's not like leprosy is water averse, and as soon as I jump in a river, the leprosy just runs away. There's no possible way that can work, especially with, dip in the waters 7 times. What's significant about the 7 times? It doesn't even make sense. Why would I do something like that? If the first 6 didn't heal anything, why would the 7th do anything? Well, yeah, that's true. But if the first 12 circuits around Jericho didn't do anything, why did the 13th circuit do something? Maybe it's all because God said that it would. There is no way this can work by human standards. Human logic disallows this as an answer. It just can't happen. It's impossible. But the thing is, we're not operating with human logic. We are humans who are now operating with God's logic. And that is quite a little bit different. Only by obedience to a seemingly ridiculous command can Naaman be clean. And thankfully, his servants do manage to convince him to obey, which means he does actually go dip in the river and see the results. Who knows what would have happened without the reminder from his servants, without the confrontation. Good on these servants, by the way, to speak up and say something to him. Good on Naaman to humble himself a little bit more and listen to the word of servants. Again, why would you listen to the words of slaves? But here he is again, and he's paying attention, and he is trying to find an answer. The fact is, Elisha has commanded this. The fact is, the prophet said, go wash and be clean. By the way, if the prophet told you to do something that was impressive and that was difficult to heal yourself, you would have done it. But as soon as he tells you something that's simple, and something that seemingly you could have just accomplished at home, you get irritated about it. It's a little bit silly. If it's so easy, why not just do it? And if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, right? But why not just try? Obedience leads to blessing. Without obedience, no solution is ever found. It's not that the solution doesn't exist, but without obedience, we don't access that solution. This is not how leprosy works from a physical point of view, but when God gets involved, all things are possible. And it absolutely is how leprosy ends up working. And so, Naaman does. And he does, and he goes, and he gets down in the river, and he goes down in 7 times. And when he finally does, that 7th time, in accordance with the word of God, the 6th time doesn't seem to do anything. The 7th time, heals his flesh like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. No problems with it. The leprosy is gone. This is not how leprosy works, but despite Elisha's, or God's, perceived slight on Naaman, the impossible is done. Naaman very easily could have felt ignored here. And in many ways, it seems like he was ignored here. He very easily could have gotten offended at what Elisha wanted him to do, at what God wanted him to do, and then not done it. That was the trajectory that Naaman was headed down. But he was willing to turn around and actually do it. A lot of people feel ignored, or they feel some perceived slight from Elisha or God. And maybe it is a real slight. Maybe it's not, but maybe it is a real slight, a kind of disparaging comment about a lifestyle that is sinful that God doesn't like, or that, whatever it is, you have some sin and God says, hey, stop doing that. Well, why should I stop doing that? I like doing that. It's fun for me to do whatever that thing is. A lot of people get offended at that, and they get this feeling that God doesn't like them very much, or they get this feeling that they're being ignored, or that God just doesn't care about them, and so they avoid seeking God in return, when what actually happens is God has provided us a solution to the problem, and it's up to us whether we take it or not. If we ignore the problem, that's on us, and there's a consequence for that. For us, there's a consequence. We can't get around that if we just ignore that the problem exists when God has provided the solution so readily for us. What a shame it would be if we found ourselves in that situation. The truth is the truth. The solution is the solution. The dipping in the river is the dipping in the river, and you may not think much about it. You may not like it at all, but that doesn't really matter. The truth is still the truth. And it's true that truth that is said nicely is a pleasant thing, and that's a very happy thing that I very much enjoy. Truth said rudely is a little bit abrasive, but you know what? Truth said rudely is still truth. And there's a certain extent to which we can say things to be as nice and diplomatic as possible, and there's a certain extent to which we say things that, there's no way they can be said in a nice way. Every way we say them is going to be offensive, and ultimately that's not on us. Ultimately, that's on the person who is ignoring what is true. A lot of times when I'm talking about the roles of men and women, or just men and women in general, I will throw in the line, yes, there are only the two, right? Because there are only two. Nature itself teaches you that. If you ignore that, then, you're just stupid. I really can't help you. There's no nice way to say that, right? There's no nice way to say, hey, if you don't believe in men and women, and if you believe that humans can be 3,000 different types of genders or whatever it is, you just don't understand the fundamental building blocks of the world, and you're an idiot. There's no nice way to say that. At the end of the day, it's not on me to say it nicely. At the end of the day, it's on other people to pay attention. Rude words that are true are still true. And so as much as I would like to be able to say things in a nice and diplomatic and, peacemaking way, there's sometimes where that just can't happen. We are not in charge of how the words come out. We are not in charge of how the words are received. We are in charge of saying the truth. The truth is going to offend some people. Naaman didn't like the fact that he had to get in the Jordan River, but it was still the truth. If Naaman walked away from the Jordan River just because he was irritated about it, just because he didn't like Elisha, or he didn't like how he was treated, or he wished that Elisha would, step out the door and say it to his face instead of sending him a messenger or whatever. If he didn't like the way it was conveyed, at the end of the day, you can say whatever you want to about the way it was conveyed, and maybe that wasn't the most helpful way, or maybe it was, and Naaman's just being a jerk about it. But at the end of the day, no matter how it is conveyed, the point is you have to obey what is conveyed. And if you don't, if you ignore what God says, well, you're just not going to have the solution for your problem. Whatever your issue is, God has an answer for it. May not be the answer that you want, but you do have to obey and pay attention. Otherwise, you'll have no answer at all. When it comes around to something like the impossible problem that we all face that is sin, God has one solution. It is to obey Him, and that means doing various things, listening to the Word of God and believing in it and obeying it and confessing your sins and repenting of those, or confessing who Jesus is and repenting of your sins and being baptized and going on to actually, be a faithful human being. There are all those ideas. God has this one solution to the problem that is sin. You can get rid of that if you want to. There are a lot of people who dislike how God says it, or they dislike what it includes, or they think there are a lot of people who say, well, baptism sounds an awful lot like I'm doing my own work, and therefore it's not God saving me, it's actually me saving me. So I don't believe that. I'm going to go a different way. Yeah, but God said it's, vital and important and essential and all those other things. There's nothing you can do to get around that. In the end, you can either get in the river and be healed, or you can stay out of the river because you're mad about how God set it up and not be healed. At the end of the day, you can either continue to murder people and not be healed, or you can repent of your sins and, stop murdering people, and then you can be healed. At the end of the day, you can either quit your lying, or you can keep on lying and not be saved. There's two different basic ideas there. Which one are you going to do? If you don't do what God says, you're not going to have the solution. That's what it boils down to. If Naaman doesn't get in the river 7 times, he doesn't get healed. If we don't change our ways, we won't get healed either. That's what you're left with. It's a very simple lesson. It's a very simple message. It's interesting to see the character of Naaman and some of the things that he does and the ways that he lives and how desperate he really is, how his even people who are absolutely desperate and really need the solution can find themselves running away from the solution if it's not according to what they want. We sometimes say, if you're... what is that? There's a saying for that. Basically, you can't, beggars can't be choosers. That's what my mom would always say. Beggars can't be choosers. If you are begging, if you are desperate, if you are in need, you can't choose what you get. You just take what's given to you. And yet at the same time, a lot of beggars are choosers. A lot of, you go to give, some homeless person is asking for money, you try to give them some food instead, and they say, no, I just want the money. Well, okay, no. Right? Beggars, absolutely choosers, and that's kind of what Naaman is. So, just because you're desperate doesn't mean you're going to listen to God. It's kind of disappointing, and it's kind of important that we recognize that in ourselves and then change something about ourselves. So thank you for listening. We'll cut it there, leave it, and give you something to think on. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed and benefited from this. Hopefully it gave you something to think about that'll ruminate in your head for a little bit and help your focus on God. God bless. I will see you in the next episode. I think there's a class coming out on Wednesday on the next chapter of 1 Timothy, maybe 1 Timothy 4, and nothing on Friday, but we'll have a full slate next week, or at least, Lord willing, we should.